Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Top of the morning to you. In the course of today's programme, well, man flu is a thing. There you go. You'll hang on for that, won't you? Man flu is a thing. It's not a sort of invention of the weakling male. Well, we'll return to the question of what the hell you can do to protect yourself at work, as conditions at a JD Sports warehouse are reported to be worse than in prison, with staff facing the sack if they dare to sit down. But we begin, as we will continue, I think, throughout the programme today, with questions of morality. It's a weird one, isn't it? It's a bit like talking about ethical foreign policy and realising halfway through that there's no such thing. Well, what is morality? It's a belief in right and wrong. And then when you elevate that into the political sphere, it's a belief that there are things you should do. And I guess the line I would add here is, even if there's nothing in it for you, sort of in material terms, there's a superb article in The Atlantic, a lengthy piece. You can find it online. Barack Obama talking about foreign policy and Syria. And I read it yesterday, so I may be slightly misremembering. But essentially, the decision by him not to intervene more in Syria earlier boils down to a slight sense of not wanting to get involved in another Muslim civil war in the Middle East. Lessons learned from Afghanistan and the second attack upon Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Lessons learned from the failure of having a plan in place for what happens next. So you go in, you take out Assad. What the hell happens next? It could conceivably be worse than what was there before. He was against Gulf War II, you know, Obama, as a little-known senator. He was one of the few to make meaningful and powerful speeches about why it would be a terrible mistake. Funny how history forgets things like that. And it was George W. Bush's father, George H.W. Bush, who actually inspired much of Obama's foreign policy, which is best explained in the fact that they went in Gulf War I, got the Iraqis out of Kuwait, but left Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So there was actually a plan. You can't march into Kuwait. They're our allies. We're worried about the oil supply. We're not going to allow that to happen, but we're not going to interfere in the sovereign status of your nation. It's a brilliant piece. I'll tweet you a link to it later from my Mr. James O.B. account. And it really stayed with me, actually, throughout yesterday, because we did something a bit different, didn't we, yesterday morning on this question? And it was to sort of really put our hands up and say, I don't know. I actually don't know. And it really helped me out when I went off to do another job last night, because I sat in the studio talking to people like Paddy Ashdown, who of course was the UN Commissioner in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and so really is qualified to draw comparisons with the massacre at Srebrenica. And then one of my all-time favourite journalists, Matthew Parris, arguing that there wasn't a great deal we could have done. There's tension between people who believe we absolutely should have done more and people who feel that it would have been good to do. Of course it would have been good if you could have somehow staunched this blood flow. But where do you derive your confidence that we would have done? Where do you derive your confidence that we would have made a meaningful difference? George Osborne yesterday gave a very interesting and I thought quite noble speech. It doesn't mean I necessarily agree with what he said, but it's always refreshing, I think, when a politician admits in a sense to a mistake, or at least takes some responsibility for things having gone wrong. He didn't quite admit to a mistake. He kind of said everybody else's mistake is responsible for the situation in Syria, but I should have done more to win that vote. It was back in 2013, of course, that the British Parliament, with a whipped Labour opposition, voted not to intervene in Syria against President Assad's forces when he clearly had started sort of killing and possibly breaking international law with regard to his own citizens. And then it gets the simple treatment today in some newspapers and in some corners of the British media, which is, you know, have we made a terrible mistake? Have we made a terrible mistake? Should we have done more? I'm not embarrassed. In fact, I think it's probably a great starting point. I'm not embarrassed to tell you that I actually don't know on this one. The pictures coming out of Aleppo would break the hardest of hearts, even in the current Great Britain, where we're daily encouraged to hate on people because they come from places like Aleppo. Even in this environment of toxicity, you can't hear about hospitals being attacked. Or the line that really resonated with me from Andrew Mitchell's speech in the House of Commons yesterday, oddly, wasn't the one about bodies piling up in the street and people being shot on the spot, women and children in their own homes and on the streets. The line that really resonated with me, possibly because you paint a picture in your mind, was about doctors in pop-up clinics having to wear rubber boots because there's so much blood on the floor. And you can't say it now, can you? I don't know, maybe you can. Maybe you are possessed of a different heart from mine and most people's. But you can't say, I don't care. But where's the line between caring and committing, do you think? Because another line that comes back from 2013, the current head of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Crispin Blunt, and this resonates across the years for me, was a line about relieving ourselves of, I might have got the first bit of the quote wrong, but the next two words are bang on, imperial pretensions, by which he means the notion that we as a physically quite small country, obviously economically, historically, politically, we have always punched above our weight. That's probably about to change in the coming years. But why would it be a British concern to clip the wings, if you will, of President Assad of Syria? I mean, the links with this country are fairly tenuous. They're certainly not going to be much greater than they are to Arab League countries or indeed to other European countries who may have a rather larger dog in the race. So I just want you to tell me, from a very personal point of view, not from a sort of pick a side and start shouting at each other point of view, and drawing on what I am not embarrassed to describe as morality. I think we're probably in a place now where we need to start honing our understanding of what morality is. What should we have done? In 2013, when, it was slightly prior to that, wasn't it? It was when the sort of ripples of the Arab Spring started reaching Syria in early 2011, and President Assad responded in a very, very dictatorial and oppressive fashion. Originally, it was sort of pro-democracy protesters, but his response to them effectively morphed into the opening salvos of what became the civil war. They clamped down on the protesters, being brutal, and understandably so in a purely objective sense, because, of course, he'd seen what had happened in other Arab countries during the so-called Arab Spring. And then it escalates because the resistance grows, the so-called moderate rebel groups, which, again, so much seems to pivot on the notion that there were moderate rebel groups there that we could have somehow identified and supported without simultaneously giving support to the Islamists and the self-styled jihadists who would also be seeking to cause unrest and topple Assad because of the vacuum that would create. And the idea that David Cameron clearly passionately believed, and George Osborne still believes, but Barack Obama rejected out of hand, the idea that we would be able to find the moderate rebels, help them and arm them, and somehow use them to fight against Assad without giving succor and support to the other people who hate Assad, but happen also to hate us, i.e. the Islamists. I told you it was complicated. Actually, it's not that complicated. It's just really surprising and convoluted. So just to drive that point home, fast forward 2 years to 2015, when there was another parliamentary vote, another parliamentary call for action in Syria, and this time it was passed. So in the space of 2 years, we went from voting against military action to voting for airstrikes. But guess what? The bits of Syria that we voted to drop bombs on, to do airstrikes in, were now occupied by Islamic State or ISIL or Daesh or whatever you want to call them. So we moved in the space of 2 years from voting against attacking Assad to voting in favour of attacking people who consider Assad their enemy. So the idea of there being two sides in this war seems palpably absurd. I think there's probably 30 or 40. I just want to know what you think. I don't know how to describe you. Do I describe you as a moral compass? Do you want to bring religion into it? It's probably not going to be super helpful, because the idea that your morality is contingent upon whatever old book you read as a child is a little bit silly. But the idea that we somehow feel we should have done something, it seems to me to be a little bit... What's the word I'm looking for? It seems to me to be a little bit sort of exculpatory. Is that a word? When you're trying to sort of absolve yourself of blame. I don't think we could have done anything. There you go, I've said it. I don't know or rather, I do not know what we could have done that would have made things better than they currently are. And it is not a meaningful response to that observation to say, but things are absolutely awful, James. Surely it would have been better to do X, Y, or Z. Why would you say that? Look at how Daesh arose from the cinders of Saddam Hussein's regime. Cinders that were left untended and free to flame up by Western forces, because we didn't have a plan of what to do after you remove a very powerful dictator from power. How do you fill the vacuum? And vacuum was the word that George Osborne used yesterday. The West created the vacuum into which Putin has now moved. It's an almighty mess. It's an almighty mess. But I'm not sure it could have been any tidier. That is perhaps the point at which a kind of idealism or moral appeal has to be separated from pragmatism and reality. What do you think? Yeah, you know as much about this as any of the people that are paid to comment on it. All you have to do is stay up to speed with 2 or 3 news sources, conflicting as they will hopefully be. There's some things upon which everybody seems to agree. Actually, I can't even say that, because if I tell you that the United Nations have accused pro-government forces of killing civilians, then I have to tell you that the Russians deny this, or the Syrians deny this. So what do you think? Bring Afghanistan into it, bring Iraq into it, bring Gulf War I and Gulf War II into it. The idea that we used to wave our flags as troops went off to Middle Eastern lands to deliver democracy or to stand up to dictators. It's within, the last decade we'd be up for that. We'd get quite kind of dewy-eyed and patriotic about it, going off to deliver. We just don't buy that anymore, do we? And if we don't buy that, what is the role of Britain on the international stage? When President Assad started killing his own people because they were trying to overthrow him, and because some of them were prepared to kill his troops in pursuit of that goal, why is that Britain's business? And as I say that to you now, does that make you feel a little bit diminished as a country, or does it make you feel a little bit refreshed? Oh, thank God we seem to be arriving at a place where we don't think we've got our duty to sort out everybody else's problem. I quite liked being a member of the country that thought it was powerful enough and important enough to have a stake in everybody else's problems. I quite liked that. That to me is the greatness of Great Britain, if you will. But it feels a little bit dog-eared now, and it feels a little bit wrong when you look at the results of what we have done. 16 minutes after 10. I make no apology for going on, actually. It's an incredibly difficult subject, and part of the reason why it's difficult is because people in the British Parliament, people in the House of Commons feel, whichever way they voted back in 2013, they feel as political agents somehow responsible for some of the bloodshed in eastern Aleppo. I feel incredibly sorry for those people, but I can't sit here and tell you with a straight face what we should have done differently. Luckily, I don't have to. You can. Hit the numbers now, 0345 6060 973. What, if anything, would you like your government to have done differently with regard to the Syrian civil war, and most pertinently, perhaps, with regard to the unfolding and probably, sadly, not completed carnage in the eastern part of the largest city in that country? What, if anything, should, quotes, we, end quotes, have done differently? George Osborne appears still to be persuaded that we should have dropped bombs and possibly gone further against President Assad back in 2013. Barack Obama, rather more compelling case for why he still believes he was right not to do so. Jeff's in Woking. Jeff, you can kick us off this morning. What would you like to say?
Okay, good morning, James. Yeah, well, at the time in 2015 and in 2013, when they had these various votes, there just wasn't the appetite, I don't believe, for this country to get involved.
Well, no, clearly there wasn't, which is why we voted against it. But do you think we should have done anything differently in terms of morality?
Well, it's very much hindsight, James. I mean, none of us were to know what was going to take place, since those votes and what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, but you can deconstruct my decision-making process, but what we're doing today is discussing with hindsight the decision that we made back in 2013. So now that we've got hindsight, do you think we made the right decision?
Yes, we do, because I still don't believe, even today, that we've got the appetite in this country to get involved in another...
Well, so when you say appetite, you mean morality or moral duty. We don't have any sense of a moral duty to get involved.
Well, there is concern. Clearly, there's concern about what's going on in places like Syria. But when it comes to actually getting involved in that...
We're not talking about what's going on in places like Syria. We're talking about something described by the United Nations as a complete meltdown of humanity in a square mile section of one city in that country. We're talking very specifically about that and the suggestion that we could have prevented it from happening by coming down harder and quicker upon the forces reportedly responsible for it. So in terms of moral agency, moral duty, the bodies of babies rotting in the streets, if we could have prevented it, do you believe we should?
Yes, I do. Yes, but overall, in the Parliament, I don't think there's an appetite for it.
No, well, that's why they voted against it, Jeff. I don't think you're going to win any prizes for political acuity for suggesting that there was no appetite for action that Parliament voted against. Manny's in Barnet. Manny, what would you like to say?
Good morning. Yes, I'd like to bring in a discussion from a different angle. I'm a Muslim. I know we've had all the kind of negative issues to do with Muslim, but that's the point. I'd like to bring in the morality aspect using Quran, which is the word of God. And obviously, it's a similar thing, no doubt, in other religions.
I mean, at the risk of falling out with you, mate, I have to remind you at this point that it may well not prove to be the word of God, but you're perfectly entitled to believe for the time being that it is.
That's fine. We can move on that basis. Wrong being done, then as human beings, we should, first of all, if possible, should make physical involvement to correct the wrong.
But we can't do everything. I normally hesitate to use these sort of cliches, but we're not the world's policeman. It's not. So you can make a long list of all the things that, under some sort of sense of Quranic duty, we should be seeking to fix. But the minute you accept that we, no, you don't, because I haven't finished. The minute you accept that we can't fix all of them, why would you put Syria higher than anything else? For example, the Philippines at the moment, they're murdering people like it's going out of fashion.
Correct, but let me add the other two stages we mentioned. If we are physically unable to do so for all kinds of reasons, and then there are many resources, we can't be all over the world. Understand all that. The next thing we should do is we should use our speech, our voice, our influence in the United Nations, media, and so on. So that's the next stage we should use. Our physical voices. The methods of communicating, raising the subject on a higher level, that's the second tier. If that can't be possible, then as a Muslim, as a third thing, you should in your heart feel that you should do something. So it's a heartfelt sympathy for those people. That's obviously the weaker of the three things. So I want to bring in and that doesn't apply, as you said, just Syria. We should, as human beings, to apply these three things on all issues around the world.
I just think that is the most unrealistic suggestion that we'll hear all week. You might well be right, but it almost belongs on a greetings card, doesn't it? That sort of sentiment. We have a duty to help wherever we can. Wherever there is suffering, we must bring peace. You just can't. Politics.
Let me give you an example, yeah? You can apply that philosophy on all domains. On a street level, if a woman's getting attacked, then if you're a man strong enough, you should obviously physically get involved. If you can't, you're a woman, for example, observer, then you should shout and say, stop this is wrong. And if you're unable to do anything, you're a child, then obviously, you stand back and you feel sorry for the person being attacked. I'm just giving you an example how that philosophy can be applied.
Listen, mate, I wish you well and I hope you have a great day, but that is the most rubbish example imaginable for a theory that was already pretty ropey.
But in a practical sense...
There was absolutely nothing practical about anything that you said. And the reason why I'm a little snippy and a little snipey is because that's the reason why these problems occur slightly. This sort of woolly sense, we must do something. It's our moral duty to do something. Oh, yes, it's like shouting at a man in the street who's attacking a woman. No, it's not. It's like flying over a war zone where either side might be using weapons that contravene the Geneva Convention. They might be dropping barrel bombs or slicing throats, and you fly over that with American or British troops in an aircraft, and it gets shot down, and they're trapped behind enemy lines, and the Prime Minister or the President have to decide whether or not to send in British troops to mount a rescue. So to suggest that it's a bit like feeling sorry for someone getting mugged in the street is precisely the point of my conversation this morning, although it's the spectacular nature of how badly you've missed the point that makes your contribution so valuable. Nick's in Twickenham. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I love your show, especially what you say about doctors. Here, we should not have been involved. We were absolutely correct not to get involved.
Right, quick health warning. I've just realised at 28 minutes after 10, I'm going to argue the toss with everybody today. I'm in one of those moods. But I'm closer, I think, to your point of view than I was to the last fellas.
So, yes, definitely we would have created more mess, destabilizing Assad and then empowering ISIS more, and they would have taken over the whole of Syria by now and killed many more people than Assad has killed. So it was a good idea then. It is a good idea now. We don't have money to get involved. We don't have any moral responsibility to anybody. I know it's very sad what's happening in Aleppo, but there's a lot of bad things happening all over the world, especially in the Muslim countries. We can't stop all of that. So we should just sit tight, concentrate on our internal affairs. We don't have any money to fight anywhere.
That's pretty powerful. Although it is a complete abnegation of anything that could be remotely described as moral duty, right? We don't have any moral duty to... Are you suggesting that we probably have a moral duty to problems closer to home, perhaps? But if it's unfolding in the Middle East, if there's no obvious threat to national security, which again is something we could argue about, then we should sit on our hands and do nothing.
Absolutely. It's actually dangerous to get involved, as we know what has happened by the bombings and all the terrorist activities. They don't like it. They don't like us to get involved. So why do we get involved?
Well, I mean, I think I could make a case for suggesting that with the sort of subjugation of the rebellion in eastern Aleppo, and no doubt it will follow fast upon elsewhere, then you have another humanitarian crisis. You have another tidal wave of humanity making its way out of that part of the world, and another real risk of people who do wish the West harm hiding within that tidal wave of humanity. And remember how quickly people on the far right use the suggestion that there might be one terrorist among 1 million deserving innocent souls to say that we should let the 1 million deserving innocent souls die. It's 10:30. The moral duty that we have to the people of eastern Aleppo is proving a little bit hard to distill. I wonder if you can do a better job than me, because I can't muster one up. I muster up horror, shock and sadness. But the idea that Parliament should have voted to intervene against President Assad, who, I mean, he's elected in the sense that Vladimir Putin is elected, his big ally. They both get results in elections in the sort of high 90% marks. But what would have given us the right to intervene? Especially when you consider, just to throw in another wrinkle, the other story from the Middle East unfolding today, which involves the Saudi Arabian Army Air Force standing accused of firing missiles at a hospital that they bought from us. Okay, where's the moral duty there then? So this, I think, is part of the problem. And you remember when we first started spending our mornings together, not long after the September the 11th terror attacks, and then we were on air together on the morning of the July the 7th ones. It was a day I will never forget. And you may remember the verbal violence I would reserve for anybody who rang in to say, of course I condemn the terror attacks, James, but as a Muslim, and that I'd literally, my head would explode. But there's no but when you're condemning a terror attack. That seems to have shifted now. We don't get that level of debate or digression. Everybody now just says, yeah, of course I condemn it. Flipping out. The woman on the seafront in Nice was wearing a headscarf. The first police officer on the scene at Charlie Hebdo was a Muslim police officer. He got shot dead. It's not really a kind of Muslim thing. It's the nutters against everybody else, and they'll kill Muslims, Christians, non-Christians, atheists, Zoroastrians, Buddhists. They don't care about that. But if we in the West cast ourselves as exporting morality, committing a moral duty, if our justification for killing people in Iraq is our morality, our moral compass, our desire to export democracy for moral reasons, almost a Judeo-Christian ideology, then I'm afraid you are allowed to turn around and say, hang on a minute, you sold the missiles to those Saudis who just blew up a hospital. What the hell are you claiming moral agency for intervening in Syria for? I don't know that you can square that. James is in Kings Langley. James, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James, and happy Christmas to you.
And a happy Christmas to you too, although we both must now prepare for the anti-Christian backlash, James.
Yeah, well, so be it. Basically, I'm not a scholar in international law, but I thought it was illegal under the United Nations Charter not to invade or interfere in a sovereign state. And Syria, we like it or we don't like it, was a sovereign state. We weren't invited to go in there and help, or to get rid of Assad. So, we're full of hypocrisy. The United Nations is there. We made this international law. Then we disagree if money or oil is involved.
Well, it's not. I mean, that's not quite what happened. There was a very powerful call from within the United Nations for action, but it got vetoed by Russia and China, which means the United Nations can do nothing. This is part of the reason why the UN is looking increasingly toothless, although it's important to understand why and not just listen to the people on the sidelines pretending that they're deliberately toothless. If China and Russia veto something, you can't do it with UN approval, with UN sanction.
Well, I still think we cannot just keep going. The days are gone when you get on a sailing boat, go to another land, put a flag in and say, this is ours, this is our responsibility.
They're gone for now, but it's 2016. We're in reverse. It could be back. It could be back in fashion by Christmas, James.
Looks like it, doesn't it? I mean, 300 years ago, we had the religious wars, the persecution, the Catholics, the Protestants. We went through it. The Middle East is going, it's readjusting. It's a battle in Islam. It's not our battle.
It's not even Islam, really. You've got an Alawite minority that benefits from Sunni Shia tension. It's just a big, powerful dictator trying to hang on to power. I mean, it's as old as the hills.
Yeah, but that's their internal problem. We can't be the moral compass of everywhere. We're not an industrial power no more. Our ruling class destroyed our industrial base years ago. We can't even fund our hospitals. We can't fund our schools now.
No, we can. We just choose not to.
Well, we choose not to. We can. We're wealthy.
We're the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world.
Look after our own people.
Well, again, we can. We just choose not to, and then get horribly distracted when people say things like that in the context of a foreign aid argument, without mentioning that we've got 370 million quid being spent on refurbishing Buckingham Palace in the coming year. So it's like everybody's household finances. If you can't afford to buy or you choose not to buy beans, it doesn't mean you spent too much money on broccoli. But is there nothing that would sway you? This was the powerful piece to the UN yesterday by Samantha Power, the American ambassador to the United Nations, and she effectively asked the United Nations what I'm now asking you, which is there no point at which you feel we do have a duty to act? How many babies have to die?
But this is moral blackmailing, isn't it? What can we do? If you've got a country in turmoil, like our civil war, we had all the West and the East of the European countries went through civil wars. There's been civil wars from time immemorial. We've had invaded armies. It never pays to interfere when there's such...
Well, it does. It does pay to. When Germany invaded Poland and we chose to interfere, it was probably, I think we'd all agree, it was the right thing to do.
It was then, because we had an agreement with Poland. We'd betrayed the Czechs.
Yes.
But we had an agreement with Poland. We had,
you're right. This would be on the hoof, wouldn't it? This would be ad hoc policy making in response to changing events.
You can't pick and choose which one you're going to intervene. What about the Philippines? There's 40,000 people genocide going against.
It's not genocide. He's killing drug dealers.
The liberal left, they want to invade everywhere.
Hey, the liberal left wants to invade everywhere. Where are we now? The liberal left are usually the Pacific wants to stop the war coalition.
No, maybe let me recorrect that statement.
That's all right. We're blaming the liberal left for everything this year.
In everywhere.
Yes.
I apologise for that remark. I don't want to offend anyone.
Oh, bless you. I was only teasing. But there is no circumstance then, in the absence of international treaties, there's no circumstance in which you think Britain is a country, like America historically has been, that tries to do or at least intervenes and tells itself that it is somehow doing the, quotes, right thing.
Well, no more, James. Sadly, we've got to come to the reality. We are nothing. Look at the hi-fi. We're 53 on the list
Wi-Fi.
of hi-fi countries. We can't even put hi-fi in our country.
Wi-Fi, bless you.
Well, for God's sake.
It's Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi, not hi-fi. Hi-fi's even... We led the world with hi-fi. We led the world. That's when the great was in Great Britain. Hi-fi we had no. Wi-Fi, James is referring to some research published today by our own actual government that puts us behind. And they always pick the best countries to point out how backwards we are. So they've gone for, what was the other one? They've gone for Romania and Peru, is it? We've got worse Wi-Fi coverage than Romania and Peru. I feel a bit sorry for the Peruvians. Why shouldn't they have brilliant Wi-Fi coverage? But James speaks, I think, really rather powerfully of the... What would you describe it as? The futility of caring. That's the point, isn't it? I think. You feel... I think probably humankind is divided rather more than we realised until recent events between people who do care about suffering and people who just don't. But there's another tribe there. People who actually do care. People who genuinely do worry and fret and wring their hands and signal their virtue. But... when you turn off your heart or you dial down your heart and crank up your brain, you're left with a question of what you could reasonably do. And if the answer to that is not clear, the case for doing something diminishes. And then you're left with situations like Srebrenica, 6,000 people killed. Innocent people killed because we didn't do anything soon enough. Could we have stopped that? I don't know. Back to 2020 hindsight. 10:42 is the time. Alex is in Finchley. Alex, what would you like to say?
Yes, I was going to say that Osborne, when he made his comments yesterday,
Yes.
was ignoring the fact that we are already intervening in Yemen, albeit under the guise of the flag of another country.
I mean, that's not an albeit. That is, I think, quite a big distinction. We did an hour last week on the difference between diplomacy and hypocrisy, and for the record, we didn't find much difference. But I mean, we know what the difference is. Flogging weapons to a regime, providing a little bit of advice, is not the same as sending in British uniforms.
Well, look, with the Saudi arms sales at the moment, the way I understand it is that it's basically being run by Britain. It's all the technical support, all the military support, all the back-end stuff of the Saudi arms sales are due.
And the Houthi rebels in Yemen overthrew a sovereign government. So again, there's no sort of black and white moral comparison to be drawn here. I accept British involvement in atrocities being committed in Yemen. I think you have to. Even the Foreign Office kind of does, really. But that doesn't mean we sit on our hands when President Assad starts butchering his own people. Or does it? Do you actually? Can you draw a powerful link between those two observations? Because I can't see it.
There's also the other fact that we had already had precedents by intervening in Libya, which turned out to be a disaster. So what would have happened if we had intervened then, and we would have had a consequence of Libya?
Yeah.
But in Syria, it will be the consequences will be.
Is this the thing then that we don't really admit into the debate? That however, there's 50,000 civilians in eastern Aleppo at the moment, contained within a space that could be sort of best described as about 4 blocks of the city. Just imagine what that would be like. It's like being kettled, knowing that you're probably going to die. And that gets us, rightly, and I don't want to turn into the sort of person that can just not care about that. I don't want to turn into the sort of country that doesn't debate it and discuss it and contemplate action. But unless you can make a really powerful case for creating a scenario that would be less bad than that, you can't risk British blood.
Exactly, but the other issue is that I remember how this war started, and I'm sure there were many agents provocateurs from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other places trying to infiltrate basically it was a power grab by the Saudis, as far as I was concerned, to get access into Syria. So
Saudi were backing who, do you think?
Well, the rebels.
Yes, and Iran was backing Assad, so it became another of what Boris Johnson, in his unguarded moments, calls a sort of proxy war. Maybe, although the Islamist element adds a slightly different flavour to it, because that informs the Russian reaction. Why do we find it so difficult then to? Why do some people find it so difficult to say, look, it's absolutely awful, but we can't and shouldn't do anything?
The problem is that we should do something, but we're not doing the right things. That's my word.
Oh, that'll do. Just saved by the travel news, Alex. It's 10:46. And this is offered up in jest, but I think with a very serious sideswipe from Scott Balcony. We need to bomb some British values into them. You know, after the year we've had in 2016. I could see that being a headline, really, by the end of 2017. Speaking of which, did you see that wonderful tweet from James Blunt yesterday? There's a man who's somehow managed to perfect, and that's not a word I use often, he genuinely has perfected the art of humble self-promotion without somehow moving into the area of the so-called humble brag, where you pretend you're being humble, but you're actually bragging. Yeah, guilty of obviously guilty every single day. But he's done it. He's pulled it off. He does actually recognise the ill will that he engenders among a lot of people and somehow manages to harness it to promote himself and make people like him. So he tweeted yesterday, if you thought 2016 was bad, I've got an album out in 2017. I just loved it. It's absolutely bang on. Whether or not 2017 sees we need to bomb some British values into them become an explicit pronouncement of a British politician, only time will tell. Ela is in Waltham Cross. Morality and Syria. Ela, what would you like to say?
Well, what I'd like to say, as I said to your producer, was I think the only moral thing to do anywhere is not sell arms and make money out of people's miseries and war. We can't do anything else, but at least we can do that.
We can't do that.
We can't like intervene for anything else. Sorry.
Are you out for a ride with the Huskies?
It's my workplace. So basically,
no, but we can't do that, Ela, because and correct me if I'm wrong, but if someone else has got arms and they're using them to hurt people that we like, and the people that we like haven't got any arms, surely we've got to make some arms and give them to the people that we like, or you know, people might start attacking us with arms, and we haven't got any arms. We'd be armless.
We can have arms. We can have arms for our own defence
and our friends. And what about our friends and our treaty partners, our allies?
No, the thing is, if somebody comes and wages war on us, we can defend ourselves. But when we start selling arms to other people to have their wars, that is wrong in my...
But they can make their own then. It doesn't really stop the wars from happening. It just absolves us of any culpability or response. So it's like a kind of Pontius Pilate style act of washing our hands. They're still killing each other, but they're not doing it with our guns.
No, it's about morality. It's we're saying that we may actually give them aid for anything, you know, like for people, for children, for hospitals, but we will not sell arms, because by selling arms we are just, you know, either we keep keeping the wars going, or we are actually enabling them to start it. I mean, you know, what others do, we should not be worrying about. We should only worry about what our moral values are, because we can't change other people. We can only change, and we can only look after ourselves. And even as a nation, I believe that's what we ought to be doing, that we need to have compassion, yes, but we must not tell other people when or why they should fight. I mean, if I'm fighting with my neighbor and you're my other neighbor, what's it to do with you, you know? But you can offer...
Well, I mean, you treat us all as if we're sort of blancmanges. If you're fighting with your neighbour and I am your other neighbour, I will listen to both sides of the argument and then make a decisive intervention on the part of whoever has got right on their side. I to be simplistic about it. Otherwise, what's the point of being alive? Richard is in Portsmouth. Richard, what would you like to say?
Well, I was on my way to work, James, and I just had to pull over because of a passing comment that you did.
Do you need a note? Do you need a note for your boss to explain why it's my fault you're late?
No. Just to be on the point, I don't think the UK should intervene in Syria, simply for the fact that they don't intervene in other places, like Saudi Arabia, where there's a lot of...
And this is where any talk of a moral compass actually becomes bogus.
Exactly. And, the passing comment that you made when you insinuated that, we should intervene in places like the Philippines, that's what got me to pull over, James, because...
Go on.
I think it's rather unfair that you would mention the murders that are happening. And I admit there's a lot of murders happening now, but
Well, why do you feel it's unfair? I'm more than happy to apologise if I've upset you. And I wasn't insinuating that we should get involved. I was actually agreeing with the point you made at the outset, Richard, when you said, why would we get involved in country X and not country Y? And you could make a case for suggesting that there's a humanitarian crisis underway in the Philippines, so why wouldn't we be getting involved there? I was actually using the comparison to back up the idea that we have no business getting involved in either problem. But you sound quite upset, and that upsets me. I didn't mean to upset you.
It didn't.
Mate, you take your time. Take your time. I don't know what you think I said, but I'm pretty confident it isn't what you thought. You're Filipino, right?
I think that's pretty obvious.
It's 2016, mate. Nothing's obvious. And you felt that I was somehow suggesting that that the British should intervene in the Philippines?
Well, because the mere fact that you mentioned it, because the way you said it, that there's a lot of murders going on in the Philippines, and
that bit's true, though, right?
There is a lot of murders that's been happening since time immemorial.
Yes. Okay. No, well, I mean, I'm absolutely happy to withdraw whatever it was that upset you, because there's more than enough upset in the world. It was simply an attempt to point out that if you use a sort of externally imposed moral compass to decide which countries we should be disciplining or invading, then some people might put the Philippines on the list. I wouldn't, for the record, for the same reasons that I wouldn't, at this point in proceedings, have put Syria on the list back in 2013. Because why? Why at the top of a list that would have 30 countries on it? Richard, I hope you take care. You're all right, mate. Don't start driving again until you've had a bit of a breather. All right.
All right, mate.
Well, have a great Christmas. And God bless. It's 10:57. Gary's in Walthamstow. Gary, what would you like to say?
I don't know if I've got anything to say now, James, actually. I think...
You just got 7 producers sacked for saying that on air. How on earth did you get put through? Do you mean that the quality of the contributors so far has left no room for further contribution to this subject, or did you mean something a little less impressive than that?
I've got further contribution, whether it's used or not.
You are welcome to my world, Gary. What do you want to say?
I think the problem is, in the West, we have just lost faith in our governments. We've lost faith in them. If you've gone back 30 or 40 years, I think, generally speaking, in the West, people thought that their governments were right and doing the right thing. Nowadays, they're not sure. There's lots of information that they can access on the internet and other places, and they don't know who's actually telling them the truth one way or the other. And it's the lines are just blurred. The problem with whether we should have intervened or not is we cannot measure the effects of what we haven't done.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it?
That's the problem. And if I said to you, for instance, James, coming back as a 20-year-old man, which year would you like to come back in? 1916, 1941, 2021, or 2041? Which one would you choose?
Ask me again.
1916.
Yeah.
1941. 2021 or 2041?
Yeah, well, it's a rhetorical question, isn't it? But it's a powerful one.
Yeah, because it's a little bit like the Brexit. You're going to choose what you think is likely to be better in the future. However, the future could be far worse. And that's the problem. Project Fear. What would have happened? And are we really concerned about the life and the death of those people in Syria? And I would put it to you that we're not, because there are children dying in Africa by the day.
Children dying in Britain.
Well, yeah, exactly. While we spend trillions of dollars.
This is you've nailed something there. I'm not sure what, and I don't think you are either. So don't think I'm being rude. But there is something about this hierarchy of importance that we make, like, and so many other elements come into it, like the appalling crimes committed by refugees against women, which people take to social media to get really, really cross about, and they are awful, some of these crimes. But 2 women per week are killed in this country. I never see anyone dedicating a Twitter account to what we can do to keep them alive. It's like we pick and choose our morality, don't we?